which I have been avoiding, and it annoyed me so much. And I'm like, I don't want to be one of them. Like
Jump on the
now,
bandwagon.
yes, exactly. I didn't want to seem like one of those people that like I'm gonna jump on the bandwagon. Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you are tuning in from. This is the BS Buddies podcast. I'm your host, Joe. That is your host, Ian. And today, we are going to be talking about fiction books. We've been talking about this for probably 2 months, and now we're finally doing it. Took us long enough. Before we start, hit subscribe. If you're new, we really appreciate it. Leave a comment on if you want us to talk about something specific that you would like to hear about. Otherwise, Ian, how's it going today?
It's going pretty good. I'd also like to throw out there, on top of the advertising that Joe did, this is a big thank you to everybody for the Freebird story. Really took off. 7.3 thousand views, 7,300. And Joe was telling me this weekend, he was texting me that we had 7,300 views on it, and he was giving me like live updates as it was going. And at first I was thinking, there's no way. There's no way. And then I pulled it up on my phone. I looked at it. I was like, oh my God. A big thank you to everybody who shared it around, saw it, looked at it. If you appreciate it, absolutely thanks.
I saw it at 3,000 views before I went to bed, and 6-7 hours later, it jumped more than double. So really appreciate it. But we're going to get into books now.
Yeah, now we're talking about screw Freebird, talking about books. Anyways. Yeah, we've got some wonderful books lined up today. Some book series, I should say. There's series of books, not just one single book. Series of books. Thank you, Brutus, for shaking in the background there.
I have one single book. The rest are series.
The one single book. Books that we enjoyed growing up in school, anytime, anywhere, any place, any. Just any.
In life.
In life, books that we've enjoyed in life at some point, but we decided to split it up into fiction and nonfiction because we both read a good handful of each. And so
the first series, we actually share it. I wasn't super into books growing up. I had a very hard time reading until I got into high school, which I'll get into the series later. But this one we share. It's a series called Deltora Quest, and it's kind of like a kid's like knights in shining armor type of series, but
medieval fantasy.
Thank you. That sounds way better.
I don't know. I liked your description. I wanted you to keep going, but I thought I'd throw you a life preserver.
I appreciate it. But basically, it follows 3 main characters. I remember the main character is Leaf. And then he has like a big brawler dude that follows him around. Can't remember his name. And then there's a female, and I can't remember her name either. It's been a long time.
I think her name was like Jasmine.
Okay.
Or something like that.
I was kind of thinking that too, so it must be Jasmine. The
brawler. Feels familiar.
The brawler, I have no idea. I don't remember his name.
Let's call him Mike. I just want to call him Mike because I feel like Mike would be a great name for a brawler in a party.
I'll look him up and you talk about your experience with the book.
My experience with the book came from elementary school, specifically when we were, going to school together at the time growing up. I don't even remember particularly why I chose Deltora Quest.
We've been having a lot of technical difficulties this episode. We apologize for all the cuts, but Ian, what is your experience with Deltora Quest? And also, I looked up, Mike is actually Barda.
Oh, Barda! That's right!
What's your experience with the books before you throw your mic out the window?
My experience with Deltora Quest comes from elementary school. I'm just waiting at this point. It comes from elementary school, as we were young lads, shining bright, looking towards our education in the future when the world was not what it is. And for anyone who might be old enough to remember those, early to mid 2000s when you used to have reading tests with those books. Anyone who remembers that one remembers you used to read the book and then you take a 5 to 10 question test on what the book had, and you'd get a grade based off of that. And I don't know what particularly drew me to the Del Toro Quest series. I think it was the fancy spine art that used to be
Oh
on the
yeah, that
book.
was always sick.
Yeah, you remember how they always say you had the different jewels or the different gems, which gem they were going after in that book? Because you remember they had to get the gems for that belt because Thanos couldn't wear the glove at that time, so he had to have the belt, and they were going after those,
Yeah.
shiny rocks.
In each book, they went after a gem. I think it was to restore Dell, which was the city that they. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's been so long, but basically they had to go to different areas on this map, get a gem to put in the belt, and it will save the city, basically. So on the spine label, for book one, it had one gem. For book two, it had two, and so on and so forth.
and it was each gem corresponded to which one they were going. It's cool, pish posh. Anyways, the reason I remember these books, I'm trying to get myself back on a track if there was one to begin with. The reason I remember these books so well is because I remember they were very viscerally descriptive for being quote unquote elementary age reading materials. And one of the things I remember is, do you remember the weapon that the uh the soldiers used? Do you remember the graylings or the gray something? The soldiers wore gray. That's all I remember, like the soldiers of the Empire. And
Uh,
if you remember, they used those slings, and they would sling like these little magic balls that when they would break, it was like casting a spell or like a potion. You kind of remember that? Does that sound familiar?
I remember the soldiers, but I don't remember like anything about them.
Anyways, yeah, so they use these like slings, like the old David and Goliath story, right? Put like a stone or something in there and just whip it around and whack, and the soldiers would use that as weapons, and like the descriptions from the battles that they would give were just so graphic. And one of the worst ones that I remember didn't even involve the soldiers actually doing anything. There was some like well of truth or well of something that Leaf was at, and they were warned that if they were of a certain character and tried to drink from the well, bad things would happen, but they weren't told what. And then you get to find out what later on when they come upon this well, and like the two soldiers drink from the well because they're thirsty or whatever, right? Like Leaf and his gang are hiding off in the bushes being weird. And they watch the soldiers take a cup, scoop in the drink, and the soldiers whip around and they turn into trees. And that's the reason that this well is so hidden, is that anyone who drinks from this well who is of bad character, I don't know who passes the judgment on that one, if there's like, a well fairy sitting so ways away somewhere. But like this well is supposedly hidden in this super dense, thick forest. And after these soldiers drink from the well, it graphically describes how like their necks elongate and their torsos turn into trunks and their legs turn into roots and their fingers and arms shoot out into branches, and it's like that is a horrifying fate to think of. And they put some descriptor words in there that at 8 years old I wasn't quite sure what they meant, but I knew they carried some heavy weight, and that's one of the main reasons that I've managed to remember that book series to this day.
Yeah, and one of the other books that I read from that series, like it was very graphic, and like my parents ended up like reading the section I was on, and they're like, "Nope, we're gonna be done with that book," because I mean I was like 10, and it was like I'd love to describe, but basically it went into great detail about like a giant spider. Um, yeah,
Draining a man
attack.
of his
Yeah,
fluids.
I was trying to think of how to explain it without explaining it. But
Draining
yeah,
a man of his life juice.
pretty much. Uh, but that's my first one. I will save my other ones for a little bit. Ian, what's your next one?
The next fiction series, which I'm sure some people out there will give me some flack for. Some people will agree with me for, and some people won't know what I'm talking about because they didn't read it. The Percy Jackson series. I don't know why, but growing up, I absolutely loved the Percy Jackson series. The original 5 books, I remember when the original 5 books were still coming out. I think I picked up the series right around the time that number 3 was out, and I read through them, and I thought they were, wonderful. And then the last 2 came out, and I finished the series, and I thought, wow, this was fantastic. And then the part of it that I actually really loved was the continuation of the Percy Jackson series, which was the Heroes of Olympus. And for anyone who might not be in the know, the Percy Jackson series as a whole, encompassing everything, is about if the Greek and Roman pantheon gods were still alive and well, and they were living over the Mount. What was the
Mount
Olympus?
Olympus.
Yes, that's the one. They kind of read the series. I don't remember. They lived over Mount Olympus, which was moved with the heart of Western society and was over New York City and blah blah blah. And anyways, it's about these old Greek gods are still having demigod children, and these kids don't know it until they come of a certain age, and then they send out creatures to lead them back to this Camp Half-Blood so they can train them to blah to be warriors and fighters and all this. Anyways, the cool part of the series that I really loved in the Heroes of Olympus is the fact that that's where you find out that the Roman ones still exist, and they've tried to keep the Greek and the Romans ones separated for as long as they could, because every time they found each other, war broke out. And it's excellent storytelling by Rick Riordan or Riordan. I'm not quite sure how to say his last name, so I'm sorry if I butcher it. But I don't know. I guess being a young man in elementary, middle, and then high school, just thought it's one of those books that I was like, oh, that'd be so cool to go off on an adventure like that. And now I'm older and I'm like, my joints hurt and I don't want that. But at the time, it was a lot more fun to fantasize about living in a setting like that.
Yeah, I never really heard much about it. I have heard toss up like it's a great series, it's an awful series, but like I'm into like mythology, even though I don't believe in it. I think it's kind of cool, and think that's a series I would probably very much enjoy.
It's a lot of fun. The world building that he does in the books is really good. Like he really describes the environments in a way that you can picture yourself right there and you can see everything that's going on and how it happens. And if you've watched the movies at all, don't. Because the movies are absolutely atrocious. They absolutely butcher the storyline. They do nothing justice. I would wager that probably actually 10% of the movie happens in the book. Like, it's terrible. It's so
Sounds
bad.
about right.
Oh. That's
So,
all I'm going to say on that because I'm going to get heated otherwise.
before Ian has an aneurysm, I will go with my next series, which, like I mentioned before, I wasn't very into reading. It didn't interest me, and I was slow at it anyway. But once I got into high school, I really wanted to give reading a try. And I went to the Walmart in town, and I'm like, oh, this cover looks good, and the back, like the description looks like it'd be interesting. Uh, my next one gives it a run for its money, but the Shadowhunter series, like for being my favorite. Um, and it's written by Clarissa Clare. Like she has a whole plethora of different you have the main story, and it's 6 books long, but you have like the prequel, which I also haven't read, and then like you have like other books in the series that are just kind of one-offs that go into more description. And then there's, I think, another book series by her, Lady Midnight. I have the first book, but I haven't read it yet. Really want to get into that. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically, I can't remember what they're, I mean, shadow hunters, but I think they call them by another name as well. Basically, what shadow hunters are, they're half angel, half human. so they have like human emotions and everything, but like they fight off like werewolves, vampires that try and like take control of human life and like try and mess with all that. It's kind of like their guardian angels in a sense.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool.
and there's 6 main characters, which I think is really cool. And I won't say all their names, but 2 of them are best friends that get kind of roped into it and never leave it.
Merry and
Um,
Pippin from Lord of the Rings.
I have no idea who that is. Never seen it. Never read it.
Oh,
Yeah.
a lot of people out there are going to be furiously moving to the comments after that one, Joe.
I hope so. Leave
You
comments. Whether they're positive or negative, I'll probably respond to them.
kicked
Uh,
the hornet's nest with that one.
there's actually 5 main characters now that I think of it. And then there's a lot of other characters that kind of like get put in this as well. And then the other 3 are shadow hunters. One's like the tough dude who doesn't care about anything, and the other 2 are brother and sister. And basically, how she writes it, and it sounds confusing, but it works very, very well. Usually, she'll kind of break 2 characters up a piece, and they'll be doing their own thing at the same time, but within a couple chapters, like they meet up at this certain point, but it gives you different points of view and always meets back up. Unlike the book series, I tried to read The Last Magician, which they're talking about magicians in 1904 and magicians in the present, but the magicians in the present can go back in time and you still have to remember the stuff from the past, and maybe it'll go all together in the end. I got like 70 pages in and I was just so confused I gave up. But with this one, uh, Clarissa Clare does a great job of tying everything back together, making the story feel great. The only book I didn't like out of the 9 that I read was book 4 of the original series. It was more like kind of like a romance novel, but in the sense of here are the couples that we have together. Here are their relationship problems. They're not really doing anything. Like in book 3, they'd have like a massive brawl with all these different creatures and stuff, and then it goes to we're gonna just talk about our feelings and not fight anything. So it's like builds you up and then just knocks you down. But I mean, by book 5 and 6, it just pops off and it's amazing. And I want to
Right
go
back
back and reread it and keep reading. I kind of took a break from it to read these other series that I will bring up. But Ian, what is your next one?
I would say my next one is an excellent series that, gosh, I'm trying to remember how I came upon it. I think it was among the books when I was deployed over in Afghanistan. I used to get care packages from home. And I think the book was in amongst a package of books that we had gotten. I'd ruffled through and I grabbed it. But it is the Shadow and Bone series. Well, it's not strictly called the Shadow and Bone series, but I don't know if there's any actual particular nomenclature for the series as a whole. Because you have Siege and Storm, Ruin and Rising, Shadow and Bone, I think is how it goes. 3 books in that order. And it's quite an excellent series that I unexpectedly found myself enjoying quite a lot. I'm not usually a fantasy setting kind of guy. Don't get me wrong, it's not that I dislike it, it's just not my particular taste. But this one is interesting in that it's sort of like an early 20th century alternate history, to put it in words. That would be a very confusing sound from the outside, but what it is it's based on Russian folklore, I think, just due to like the names and the terrain that they
Oh yeah.
describe and everything like that. Because in the book, it is about society living in this land that has been broken almost in two by this rift of darkness, and like it's like literally shadow blacker than night just cuts through the middle of their continent like a wall, and if you enter it, these monsters will take you. And it's like a magic wall, and there are people in this world who can use magic, and they're called geisha, or no, gracias. They're called gracias because if I remember correctly, I read something that the author had read about Gracia ninjas and just like thought that they were super cool and adored the culture behind it, and so was like, I'm gonna call the people in my book gracias, and they can use different magics. Some have healing, some are more combative, some are more for support and logistics, but none out of anyone who can do magics, none have been able to defeat this darkness that just divides the country in half until this one girl comes along and she accidentally reveals that she has the power of the sun, the light, which is a power of magic that has never before been seen in the history of this land. There's the main antagonist who controls the power of the dark. Everyone knew that was a thing, but nobody knew that the power of the sun, the light, was a thing. And they find out that this sun, this light, can defeat this darkness. And so the story encompasses this girl as she finds her newly discovered power and then goes on this up and down adventure of learning how to use it, getting betrayed by the people that she thought she could trust, questioning everything she knows, coming back around to save the day. It was wonderful world and story building, I have to say. And I still have, honestly, I should reread it. But I remember at the time that I read the first book, I was almost angry that I had read it because then, here I was in the middle of this sand pit. I had the first book and no way to get the second two
Oh
books.
yeah,
And
military problems.
I was like, what am I supposed to do? I've been left on this cliffhanger that I can't find anything else more about. But once I made it back home, I managed to get the rest of the series and finish it out, and it was excellent, excellent read. So I got to reread it. I got not just talking about it. I got to reread it.
For my next one, I asked my parents to get it for me for Christmas one year in high school, but I just put it off for so long. Started it a little bit, and then last year I decided, like, you know what? I've had this for so long. I'm gonna hit it hard, and I'm so glad I did. This one's a popular book series, The Maze Runner, which I I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did. And I read the first book and then I listened to the audiobooks through, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Libby app, which, if you don't know what it is, basically, if you have a library card, you just enter the card info on the app and then you can have the online library for your library just on your phone. There's a ton of audiobooks and a ton of regular books. We are not sponsored by them, but I would love to be sponsored by them someday. But I listened to the audiobook and the narrator, I don't remember his name. He he read it with so much emotion. It was great. But basically, if you don't know what it is, uh, there's these teenagers who wake up in basically an elevator. They get dropped off, and they're basically just have to survive in this nice little area. But outside of the area, there's giant walls and there's a maze, hence the term Maze Runner. And they haven't solved it, and they're trying to figure it out. And they go through. I don't know how much I should spoil at this point. Like,
I mean, really, you're still within the realm of the first book, so I think you're okay.
okay, because I want to expand, but I don't want to give too much away.
Kids are in a giant maze death trap and they try to escape. There's
Uh,
the short end of the long of it. Joe, you expand.
I'll try not to give too much away at the same time. But once you go further into the books, like they solve more puzzles, they have to fight new things, and I don't want to give it up, but I want to talk about it so bad because it's such a good series. The first three books are basically the main story. The fourth book is a prequel, and then the fifth book is also a prequel. And they also have book 3.5, which in book 3, one of the main characters gets separated for a while, and book 3.5 is his story that you miss. But it was such a roller coaster of emotions. The series is hard because like you start to love a lot of these characters, and then there's betrayal. There's bad things that happen to them, and it's just described so well, and it's so well put together. I'd love to go through it again. Um, but the thing I appreciate but also hate about the books, just because everyone loves a happy ending, I don't think a single book in the series has a complete happy ending. Like in video games, you get a bad ending and you get like the true ending. But in this, it's like it's always, yes, there's good, but there's a lot of bad. It's very in between. It's like
The happy
and
part is they lived. The bad part is not all of them. That's the best
that's
way you could.
perfect. That is absolutely perfect. And not like it's not like all the characters just end up dying in the end. I'll give that away. So you don't have to worry. It's not like everyone gets wiped out by the
Not
end of the series.
everybody
Yeah, that's the
gets
wink,
wiped
wink,
out.
nudge, nudge. Not everyone will make it, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make. Lord Farquaad.
Some of you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to make.
For science. And
For
that's what I'll leave it at. That's what I'll leave it at.
discovery.
That's your hint. And then one I want to mention quick before Ian gets to his next one. I did bring up a single book, which I read in between the Shadowhunter series and Maze Runner, is The Nightingale. I heard a lot of great things about it. And it's a story about two sisters during World War II. And they're placed in France somewhere. I can't remember. It sounds like they're kind of off in a small town. And basically, one sister ends up meeting this guy who is in the French Resistance during World War II, and kind of runs off with him. Goes to Paris, where it's being occupied by Nazi Germany, and tells her story, and she plays a huge role in the resistance eventually. And I'll leave it at that. The other sister is a mother, and she's staying at home and just trying to survive because Nazi Germany pushed into the town, and now she's at home with a Nazi soldier. And it basically goes into details about that, and just another good book that like has two different stories, but it keeps it interesting both times. And this one does and doesn't tie it in all at the end. I mean, their stories are so different, but you're drawn to each one.
Some things are left open to interpretation, and some things are handed to you in a nice little box with a bow.
I mean, they do. I'll say they meet up in the end eventually. I think a couple times. It's that's what I'm giving you, so I don't spoil the whole thing.
Just in case anyone out there picks it up. Just as a shoe-in, because I also have a single book, which ironically is somewhat similar to the book that you mentioned. I read it, I believe I was in about 7th grade when I read it. It's also set in World War II, and it's called Soldier Boys. Short little self-contained story, but it's really good It takes two main characters. It takes the perspective of a young man from a small town in the Midwest as World War II breaks out and he joins the army, and also from the perspective of a young man who ended up in the Hitler Youth and then eventually the German army on the front lines during the war. And it shifts back and forth between the two perspectives, telling the story of how each boy comes up, the experiences that they had at home versus in the military, and how different their lives were until eventually they meet at the Battle of the Bulge. I think it is near Bastogne, which I'm going to spoil this for anyone out there simply because the entire book culminates on this point, and even if you see it coming, it still hits hard. The young American boy gets killed trying to save the German boy who was wounded out on the field in the battle earlier that day. And the lead up of both stories as it switches perspectives is actually it's a fast enough pace that you stay engaged, but it's a slow enough build that when things finally hit their boiling point, it hits. And I won't lie, it hurts. It hurts a little bit because the story takes place right around Christmas when the Battle of the Bulge was going on, and yeah, it's a harsh one, but it was an exceptionally good story, and it's short. I don't think it's only probably about 300 pages, so not long at all, but weirdly similar yet separate from yours. But yeah, it's just ironic that we've both read stories that are kind of in the same vein of shifting perspectives to tell two different stories that eventually meet.
I kind of want to read Soldier Boys now, and I should send you the Nightingale. Granted, the copy I have, I borrowed it from a friend, and then the friend moved, and I still have the book. Um, so
Oops.
I should probably go drop that off with them eventually, but I also moved, so might have to do a meetup.
We'll get to it when we get to it.
And then, how many series do you have, or other books?
Uh, well, I don't have any particular series that come to mind right away. However, I do have another one-off. Ironically enough, it was the same one I was telling you about earlier, the one written by the same woman who wrote the Inkheart books, which for anyone who's read Inkheart, uh, fantastic series as well. I think it's a series. I believe it's a series. It's been a long, long, long while since I've read it. But it was called Dragon Rider by Cornelia Funk. And I have had that book since forever. I think it was honestly one of the first big chapter books I had because this thing is thick. Like that sucker's like a solid 2 inches. I think it's like 160 some chapters, I think. Like it's a big, substantial book, but it is a really interesting story of a dragon, um, or I should say, a group of dragons. One day, they're all in their little den. They're the last remaining dragons on Earth, and they come out of their dens one day because they hear noise and they're wondering what's going on, and they see an airplane fly over, and they hear the rattle of construction machinery in the distance, and they realize humans are encroaching upon our last hiding spot, and we have to get out of here. We don't know where to go, so they send out one of their dragons named Drake to scout for this place called the Rim of Heaven, which is a supposed fabled legend, however you want to call it, of a magical place. Think like the Himalayas. Hidden in the Himalayas, it's a sanctuary for dragons, and they have to go find it. And so the story is about this dragon and his little creature friend. I don't remember exactly what it is. It's a classic trope of super big character, really small character, great friends. And Drake and this character friend go along for the ride, and they pick up a human boy who can actually see them. I don't remember if it's explained, but they land in a city one night because I think they get forced down by a storm. They take place in an abandoned house, and they find this child. His name is Ben, and he's a kid who's been on his own. I think he was orphaned as a child, and he joins them in this journey, and it's about them flying to different magical places, interacting with creatures until eventually, they find the Rim of Heaven, and they have to battle the big bad antagonist, the big gold dragon at the end. But that was one of those books that I probably started that book 50 plus times because I had it since I was so young, but I was never able to fully comprehend what I was reading until I got older. So I started that book quite a lot, to the point where I think I had it memorized. So by the time I actually got to where I could finish, I just skipped ahead to what I knew already happened and kept reading from there. But that was a book that I really enjoyed too as a one-off. That was wonderful.
My last book series, and I mean, I've read other fiction books, but these ones are the ones that stand out the most. And we could probably talk about books for 3 hours. So we'll leave it at this. My last series, which I am currently on, which I have been avoiding, I started reading Harry Potter. At 26 years old, I started reading Harry Potter. And I'm sure a lot of my friends who are listening to this are proud of me because I kind of avoided it. For me, why that is, I feel like at least in high school, there were a lot of people that just were too much into it. And it annoyed me so much. And I'm like, I don't want to be one of them. And I know that it sounds bad, but I never wanted to be the person when there's so much hype around it that, like,
Jump on the
now,
bandwagon.
yes, exactly. I didn't want to seem like one of those people that, like, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. So I just kind of avoided it, and just, it was one of those series that's like, oh, I'll read it eventually. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. But the past few months, it's like, man, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, and I really want to get into fiction. And I mean, I was just off of the Maze Runner, and it's like, I really want to start a series. I don't know what I want to start. And then on the Libby app, like I mentioned, it's like Harry Potter was available. I'm like,
Let's do it.
we'll go for it. Let's do it. Let's try it. And this might be an unpopular opinion, like my previous one I just said 15 seconds ago. First book was not well written. It wasn't. You can't tell me that it was. It definitely felt like a book that was meant to be a movie, though. It just felt like it rushed things along super quick. And that might be because I was reading it on the app and not on with an actual book. But it just felt like it was being rushed along. It was still a good story, but in my head, I'm like, this is definitely not a top 10 book for me out of the books I've read. Then I read the second book, and it slowed things down enough to where I was happy with it. And the ending was really good. It kept me interested. I felt like it was a little rushed. Yeah, which maybe that's just me from being a slow reader to a faster reader now. I just finished the third book, and I mean, it felt honestly pretty good. Like, I felt like it was very well written. There were a lot of twists and turns, and it didn't have that like big brawl at the end, which, like, it kind of led you up the whole time. Like, there's going to be a huge fight. There's going to be a huge fight. The first two books had big fights. This one is, and then it didn't. But I wasn't disappointed, is the funny thing.
Pulling the rug out from under you.
It did in a way to where, like, pulled the rug, you fall down, but then you fall into just a huge storyline where it's like, hey, everything you believed this book was wrong. Have fun with the rest of the series. Which I'm not going to give it away in case any of you wanted to read it, but
well, I'm going to take your words at face value because I haven't written.
You haven't written
English.
any Harry Potter books recently?
No, as a matter of fact, I have not. Nor do I have any plans to in the future. Just in case anyone was wondering. I have not read read with my eyes. I have not read any of the Harry Potter books. Partially because I did not have any particular desire to. Once again, fantasy, the whole magic was never quite my genre, so I never sought it out actively to read. But also in part due to the fact that the lovely lady of my life is in fact making me watch the Harry Potter movies. And just to stir up some controversy with everybody out there, Hermione is my least favorite character out of everybody. She's
Okay.
my least favorite character. I'm not going to expand on that. I'm not going to explain. I'm just going to leave it at that and stir up some drama.
I'm a little upset by that you won't tell me. Please tell me after the recording, if anything.
I will.
Okay.
They don't get to know, but you can know.
Okay. Just in case there's any spoilers. Also, I have not seen a single Harry Potter movie or Maze Runner movie. I have not seen the Shadowhunters show. I've been intending to, but I feel like it's going to make me upset. And Ian brought up before we recorded, Deltora Quest also has an anime based on it, which I have not seen. So, yeah. The only movie I've seen that's a book series is the first movie of The Hunger Games, but I have not read a single book, and that's the only movie I saw from the Hunger Games.
I will say, as
I have another one that's like that. I'm sorry. Divergent. I've watched all three movies. I haven't read a single book. The first two movies were good. The third movie was awful. Worst ending to a movie I've ever seen. It was stupid. I haven't read the books though, but I want to say that worst ending I've ever seen. It made 0 sense. At least give me something.
I don't even remember the ending to the third movie. I think
Good. You're lucky. Do you have any other books, or is that about it?
Actually, I have shitloads of other books, but I don't think we have time to fit that all into one video. So
Yeah,
I think as far as fictional series, some of our top fictional series, I think that covers it pretty good, unless you had any extra.
Not really. Like I said, I have like one-off ones that were pretty good, but we're pushing like 45 minutes on the recording because we had so many technical difficulties to start. Ian's mic would just cut out randomly, so hopefully that doesn't happen in future videos. But if it happens, we'll deal with it. But it's time for quotes.
I won't break you yet.
So
I actually had it ready today. Oh, there's a message from my boss.
Can I get a good book quote? Like, books have so many quotes in them already. Like, can you give me a good quote about books?
Give me a good quote.
Ooh, I like this quote. Finally, if you don't see the book you want on the shelf, write it.
Ooh,
I like that one.
That's really good. I did enjoy creative writing. It was always had a lot of fun with it. Well, I had my quote ready, but now the page refreshed and it disappeared.
Oh,
So
no.
let's search up a new one, shall we? Let's search up a new one for life. How about life quotes? Let's get real deep since we're on the subject of books.
Well, Ian looks up his quote. I just want to say thank you guys for watching. If there's any book series you love or want us to check out, leave them down below. Fiction, nonfiction. We both love reading, and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Again, thank you for all the love on the shorts that we've been posting the past couple months. And yeah, Ian, what's your quote?
What you focus on will grow.
Just like the podcast.
I don't know what it means either, but sounded pretty cool, didn't it? You believed it.
But we will see you next time after I'm done reading my like 600-page book that I'm on. That's going to take me 2 months. Sorry, library. You ain't getting your book back in 2 months.
You got this. Just make sure when you're reading, you take her easy now. Oh, segue.